By the turn of the 20th century, ship production had almost completely switched to steamships. However, sailing ships were still preferred for crew training. In 1905, the Danish Merchant Navy's Training Ship for Officers Association was formed, which the following year ordered a four-masted barque of 2,670 gross register tons from the Burmeister Wain's shipyard in Copenhagen. The total cost of the barque was 591,000 kroner, with the Danish state contributing 50,000 kroner. The ship was launched on the 1st of December 1906 and christened Viking, pronounced Viking, by the Finnish crews, in traditional fashion by the Crown Princess of Denmark, later Queen Alexandrine of Denmark. The ship got off to a bad start. During a heavy storm, Viking capsized at the equipment quay before she could even make her maiden voyage. However, the ship went on trial on the 16th of July 1907 and was then taken over by the client, becoming the largest sailing ship built in Scandinavia. She is 97 meters long, stretching to 108 meters including the bowsprit, 14 meters wide, and she could load 4,100 tons. The mainmast reaches 55.5 meters above the deck, and the total sail area is 300 and 690 square meters, distributed over 34 sails. The lower yards are 27 meters long, weigh 3.5 tons, and the sails attached to them weigh 1.5 tons. The total length of standing and running rigs and spare goods is close to 35 kilometers. Distinctive for Viking is her very long poop deck. The reason for this is that she was built as a school ship and needed space for student accommodation, 80 places, and classrooms, and for cabins for the permanent crew. On the 28th of July 1907, the maiden voyage began. Viking was towed to Hamburg, where she was loaded with 530 tons of coke for Callao in Peru and sand ballast. On the 19th of August, she was towed to Dungeness, English Channel, and from there sailed under her own sails to South America. Viking arrived on 19th of December after a 112-day voyage around Cape Horn. The ship did not leave port again until 26th of March 1908 to sail via Taltal to Iquique, Chile, where a cargo of 3,524 tons of saltpeter was taken on board for Hamburg, where the ship returned after a 90-day voyage. In July 1909, the captain logged the ship's top speed of 15.5 knots at the Roaring Forties. That is between the latitudes of 40 degrees and 50 degrees south, with daily distances of 250 to 275 nautical miles. She was then on her way home fully laden with wheat from Port Pirie on Spencer Gulf in South Australia. Viking was sold in 1915 to the Danish United Steamship Company, which needed her for officer training. The ship made good profits for a few years, as freight rates had risen during World War I. After the war, rates fell, so she was laid up in Copenhagen. When rates became favorable again in 1926, she was refitted and sent in ballast to Hampton Roads in the United States to carry coal to South America. In 1928, the Åland shipowner Gustaf Ericsson bought the ship for 6,500 pounds. Ericsson had a worldwide reputation as a great sailing shipowner. In 1931, Viking was fitted out with passenger accommodation, which was available for 25 shillings per person per day. Viking made her fastest long-distance voyage in 1932, when she sailed from Copenhagen to Port Lincoln in South Australia in 84 days. Finnish artist Lena Ringbaum Linden traveled as a 17-year-old maiden voyage with Viking on the Australia voyage. At that time, it was still unusual for women to be on the crew, and she was possibly Finland's first female ocean-going sailor. She wrote 2 books about the voyage: the picture book Skeppet och Lina, published in 1956, and Flicka på Skepp, published in 1966, and in an expanded form as Skeppet och Lena, published in 1988 and 2007. After several circumnavigations of the world, Viking unloaded her wheat cargo in Cardiff in the summer of 1939, and then sailed to her home port of Mariehamn, which she arrived at on the 14th of July. She was then fitted out for her next long voyage, but World War II meant that she remained in port for several years. Viking, together with Passat and Pommern, was towed to Stockholm in July 1944 to be used as a grain silo for the State Food Commission. In December of the following year, they were returned to Åland. She participated in several of the great grain races, from Port Victoria, South Australia, to Falmouth, Cornwall. Viking won the grain race of 1948. David James was an apprentice on her voyage around the world in 1937-38, which is described in his biography. David Robb Muirhead wrote a diary and took photos of his voyage on the Viking as a working passenger in 1948, which records are held in the State Library of South Australia. Viking was part of Ericsson's fleet until 1950. She was about to be scrapped in the late 1940s, but was eventually saved by the Swedish government in 1950 and moored in Gothenburg. It took several years before the conversion of the ship into a seamen's school could begin in earnest. During the conversion, most of the ropes, blocks, and cables were removed, and the seamen's school was inaugurated in 1957. After that, Viking only left Gothenburg in the summer of 1960 to be towed to Marstrand in connection with sailing competitions. Viking became a school for deck, engine, and finance personnel, as well as future ship electricians. A suspension bridge, Älvsborg Bridge, built in 1966, has effectively locked the ship in, since the masts are taller than the bridge. It is unlikely she ever will sail the open seas again. In 1993, Viking was given her current location at Lillebommen. Before that, she was located on the western side, where the Opera House is now located. In 1994, it was time for an extensive renovation, and the interior of the ship was rebuilt from a seamen's school to a school for hotel and restaurant staff. In 1998, Viking was converted into a hotel, restaurant, and conference facility. At the end of January 2021, she was towed to Falkenberg for renovation and overhaul. This was Viking's first voyage at sea since 1960. On March 8th, she returned to Gothenburg.